Hello, I'm Jayanne Forrest, one of the teachers here at TDC, and today we're going to talk about the structure of a critique. So, the structure of a critique is pretty basic. It consists of the same things that you would think of when you're thinking about a counterplan and a dissent. So, when we think about a counterplan, you think about, I should start the other way. When you think about a dissent, you think about uniqueness, link, impact. And then the counter plan is like how to solve that dissent, right? And when you think about these things, it's the same when you think about a critique. So, going into the critique structure, I'll break it down with the definitions of these words because I know oftentimes we use a lot of jargon, we don't necessarily explain what those things mean. So, let's start in a backwards type of dictionary. So, okay, also known as critique, starts off with what is bad about the F. Then, why is that bad thing important? Why is it so bad? The third thing would be how to solve that bad thing. And ideally, this should not just be how to solve that bad thing, it should also maybe be how it solves the affirmative case slash the affirmative impacts specifically. And one more thing is why does any of this matter? And this is not necessarily always the fourth thing. Sometimes it can be up here as well. So, to clarify, the critique itself is constructed of four parts. The first thing, what is bad about the app? That is the link. The second thing, why is that bad thing important? Or what exactly, how severe is that bad thing? That is the impact. Third thing, how to solve that bad thing, or how to solve that bad thing and the AF case slash impacts is the alternative. And then lastly, why does any of this matter? Again, this can be at the bottom, but it makes sense for it to be at the top because that is your framework. So when you think of critiques, you want to think link, impact, alternative, but why does any of that matter? Because of your framework. And so you should analyze what your framework is first before you move on to actually explaining the link and the impact of the alternative. One thing that we'll talk about now is different types of frameworks, but more so the predominant example of what a critique looks like. So one of the common examples I can think of is kind of what they call the state K. This is usually saying that the state is bad. So the affirmative that you can think of that you'd be criticizing is maybe an affirmative that has some type of plan that utilizes the government. Typically, a policy ask AF will do the trick on this one. So, in the case of the United States should do X, or the United States ought to remove military aid from authoritarian regimes, etc. The link to this critique is, again, what the AF is doing bad. So the link itself is the AF's state. and that's bad. Your link evidence should usually contextualize both of those things at once. The next thing would then be using the state causes violence because the state is violent. And that is your impact. State is violent. So any instance of using it would also be violent. Then you have your alternative, which would be to, maybe use grassroots movements. So when I say grassroots, I mean from bottom up, which means from the roots. The people who have that issue should advocate to do that plan, rather than the government taking their hierarchical and violent role and placing that down on people. This can come in the forms of groups like Black Lives Matter. They are maybe sometimes aimed towards state reform, but they do not necessarily ask the state without ever deliberating. They make demands on the state. Another example of this would be the feminist movement. A lot of times, feminism is concerned with, heteromasculine structures and the patriarchy, and the state can be an example of that structure. However, there are certain things that we would demand on the state in order to protect women and gender minorities. So, for example, Roe v. Wade should not be overturned. The right to privacy should be upheld because women's reproductive rights are deserved. That's one example. So I guess your question would be, well, isn't there something missing from this? Yes, the framework. Luckily, this critique is pretty generic, so the framing does not necessarily have to be anything super, super specific. It can just be like, another reason why the state is bad, or why state is bad, or why, like, criticizing the state is good. So, for your homework, I'd like to suggest this. Check out the article, Sick Women Theory by Johanna Hedva. And take that opportunity to see if you can identify, a potential critique. So, out of that article, identify what could a possible link be. So, what exactly is she criticizing? You'll notice that Hedva will criticize capitalism. She'll criticize the state. She also criticizes certain understandings of productivity and, whether or not we are going to be pushing ourselves and whether we should be pushing ourselves and what that means for the concept of the productive worker in society versus the sick worker. She talks about what it means to be political versus apolitical. And she criticizes, for example, Hannah Arendt's definition of the political and that dichotomy that's drawn, and talks about how it excludes certain people, inevitably. The impact would be why all of those things are bad. So, for example, capitalism is bad because it forces us to believe that we are never ever productive enough for society. We can never take a break. And we stop caring about ourselves because we're so consumed in capitalist culture and so consumed in producing something that our internal well-being no longer matters. Her alternative? This might be a little bit unclear, but overall, it would kind of be a counter advocacy. So what should we do instead? One of the examples she gives is self-care. She says that in the midst of capitalism, in the face of capitalism, a giant resistance strategy is to take care of yourself. And to say, nope, I'm taking a day off today. My productivity is not the most important thing in my life. I'm the most important thing in my life. And then obviously, the framework for this is kind of hard to determine, but think about, what topics are important to Hedva. So, what topics are important in this article? And that might help you frame the debate and or frame the critique. Okay? So, just go over this. The structure of a K is link, impact, alternative, and then you should have your framing. Your homework is to review the Cyclamen theory article by Johanna Hedva and identify what a possible critique would look like coming out of that.